Hello, everybody. This is Chris Ruflin with Let's Do More Show. This week is actually episode 13. If you heard my intro last week, it was episode 12, not 13. But this week I've got a friend of mine, Heron, on the show, who's built his entire life around recovery. He comes from some pretty unreal experiences, had over 30 years active in his addiction, being federally indicted and what that looked like. Ended up on the streets of Salt Lake City, Utah with a samurai sword in hand and trying to jump in front of the rail system. All kinds of crazy things we talk about. But I think the most important thing on the show today is that we talk about what recovery can look like and what resources there are. If you're somebody who's struggling with addiction and you don't know how to get out, today's show is a great show on some tips and tricks and just a little bit of real knowledge on what it takes to get sober and genuinely rebuild a life that's been catastrophized by addiction. So I hope you enjoy the show. As always, leave comments, share, and let's help as many people as we can. Thanks. Hi, welcome back to the Let's Do More Show. This is Chris Ruflin, the founder and creator of the show. And a little joke for everybody who listens to these shows all the time. Today, I do not have a good friend on the show. Not yet, anyways. We actually recently met, and he was someone referred to me with a very powerful, impactful story. As you know, this show is all about overcoming life's obstacles, recovery from addiction, or anything else that might come up. And, excited to showcase, like I said, Heron here today. And welcome on, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm grateful to be on your show.
Yeah, thank you, man. And, I want to say that right back to you. I'm really grateful that you are taking the time to be vulnerable and willing to be vulnerable and help, other people out with your story. I think that's the big thing with getting in recovery is we have these stories that we can either use as a way to keep ourselves in shame and guilt, or we can use them as a way to save other lives. And I know you've taken that path after just spending a few minutes with you here before the show and catching up a little bit. So, I want to turn some time over to you and for those listening, also, I do want to mention that Heron has done a lot of different YouTube videos. He has a channel, XYZ8 Productions, where he does a lot of sound bath stuff, a lot of frequency work. So if you want to know more about what he's doing in recovery and you want to follow him on any of those channels, please do that as well.
Thank you.
And I'm sure he's willing to help out if you ever reached out to him, just like we are here. So, Heron, tell me about, so let's go back. I know that you spent roughly 30 years in your active addiction. I think that might be the record so far for people on the show. I've had everyone from somebody who's getting sober for the first 30 days to people who have had 10, 15 years, sober and or been lost in their addiction that long. And so one of the things I want to start with, as I do with most guests, is just what it looked like before. Like, what was your childhood like? What was growing up like? Did you have somewhat of a normal family background? Did you have addiction in your family? Kind of give us a rundown of what that looked like before the chaos.
Definitely. I did grow up in a very supportive background with my family. My mom did have multiple divorces and remarriages, and so my parents had gotten a divorce when I was 6 months old. But my dad was still there for me. I'd go and visit him for the summers out of state, and I've been through all sorts of different childhood trauma. From being sexually abused by a neighbor and not a younger, but an older kid when I was 4 years old. So a lot of that was never dealt with. Back then,
Right.
Years ago, families didn't really seek out for therapy and stuff. It was just like it was never talked about, never dealt with.
Right. It was more that they hit it. Yeah, I get that.
Yeah.
I also had that happen to me in childhood. I think that's an important thing to bring up too. I'm sure we have a lot of people that listen that may have some of these similar traumas that just aren't talked about or recognized. I talk a lot about, being in drug-induced psychosis and what that's like. Obviously, mental health is a big part of, drug addiction and alcohol abuse. Yeah, man. So I appreciate you sharing that. What other types of traumas did you experience growing up? I mean, obviously the divorces
It was just
part
that.
of it.
It was, being sexually abused. It was talked about, not really talked about, but just say, it was kind of brushed under the rug.
Yeah.
And so I never really got to experience any kind of therapy with that until way later in my life. I had, like I said, very supportive mom. She worked very hard. I was a latchkey kid growing up. So if a lot of you don't know what that is, it's like you're under latch and key. So they're busy working and you're at home told not to open the door until they get home, kind of thing,
Yeah.
So a lot of times you're out just free doing whatever you wanted to do. So when moving forward a little bit, I've moved around a lot when I was a kid until I came back here to Utah when I was in second grade. My mom had remarried. That's my little brother's dad. And he was he was a big part of my life as well, because he was the father figure that was there every day. But then it also became to a point where I didn't want to be around him because he was such an alcoholic at the time. And then became abusive. That was to myself and also to my mom. My little brother, we're 10 years apart. I love my little brother. He never got to experience that part of his father.
What is it like, real quick to interject? I mean, it's kind of an important point that you bring up there. I mean, what is it like growing up with an alcoholic parent?
Well, alcoholism has been on both sides, on my mom's side of the family with my great grandparents, my grandparents, but they all kind of just kept it. It was kept under wraps where you don't talk about it, or they were able just to handle it.
Right.
Like an experience growing up, we had, the old Mickey's bottles for Mickey's beer. It was like a green glass bottle.
Yeah.
We used to fill those up with Tang growing up, so it was kind of like glamorizing it a little bit. But
yeah.
even though my grandparents always drank around me, and it was usually beers out on the boat, when we were up at the cabin or having toddies and stuff. But it was just kind of like a normal thing for us growing up as kids, that alcohol was a normal thing. Moving forward a little bit, by the time I was 12, I was starting to drink more. I was not wanting to go home just due to with my stepfather at the time. He later passed away at an early age from liver failure and from drinking too much. He was at age 47 when he passed away. I was 25 at that time, but my mom, she was a wine drinker. But now that I am in recovery, everyone just kind of has backed off on their intake. My grandparents have passed now, but by them wanting to help support me, show support, and just not drinking around me, that's been a big thing as well.
It's nice to have a family that supports you and also will stop some of their behaviors so that it's helping you with your recovery, right?
Right. So I started drinking actively when I was 12. Started smoking weed, eating Dramamine and Marazines to get high. You eat a whole box and you hallucinate. Drink Robitussin, and then eventually moved on from there. So I had moved out when I was 15.
Oh, wow. So going back to 12, your first use was 12 years old.
Yeah.
Do you remember that, I like to talk about this with everyone that's on the show in addictions perspective, just that, do you remember the day that you used for the first time and you felt different? Like, what can you describe to people listening what that's like?
Yeah. The first time smoking pot, it was crazy, losing control of yourself. I was with other kids that were in the neighborhood they were supposedly the bad kids, but they were my friends.
Right.
They were going through their own struggles as well with their life and their families, and so it was a way of escape, and also a way to just experiment and try something different. And I was active into sports until I was a sophomore in high school, but by that time I kind of just stopped doing sports and got into my art. So my whole family have been creative. My mother, my grandmother, we've been artists our whole lives. And we've had a lot of like write-ups in the paper and art shows together, and have actually done quite a bit of things with that, being creative. So I always used drugs and alcohol as my creative outlook as well. So once I got into high school, I had moved out with a girl that was 4 years older than me at the time. So by the time we lived together for 3 years, so by the time I was a senior in high school, she was 21. So I always had even more accessibility to alcohol all through high school. But yeah, so I kind of just stopped doing sports and got into being creative and finding that outlook. So I felt that was the only way of doing it. Because you look back at all the different artists over the time periods, they've either been Salvador Dali, heroin addict, or an alcoholic, Jackson Pollock. So that was a way of my escape, and feeling that was the only way, and it was acceptable. Since I'm an artist, it's okay to be an addict. That's how I kind of looked at things for a lot of my life.
Right, and the path you took led you more down towards the path of like hallucinogens, acid, mushrooms, stuff like that.
Yeah,
kind of like
alcohol. So
yeah, and a lot of times it does, and I mean it's all these substances that you kind of end up turning to are like revolving around that art community to some degree, right? And so it's interesting. It's like, you know, I wonder, do you ever wonder if you maybe picked that outlet and built that around you? Like, or do you think,
Definitely. I felt like I have a tattoo that says insane artist on my arm and kanji. That was kind of my mentality at the time. I was a sign maker. I started making signs when I was 17. I did that for I was a professional artist for over 25 years. So I was a sign maker for about 15 to 20 years. Having a job at that time, I had my boss at the time. He was an alcoholic, smoked weed. He got me into cocaine at an early age. It was acceptable to work while using. And so that's what I had done. And I did that for a lot of years of my life. And a lot of times, you know, I would avoid other jobs because of that, because, you know, I either needed to go out and just be a freelance artist so I could do what I wanted to do because I was such an addict to everything. Everything was always more. If I didn't have one thing, it was something else.
Yeah.
But there was always that time in my life of just being under the influence and numbing either pain or life experiences of bills, you know, repairing a marriage, and you know, also grief and loss. It could be anything like that. But I've been married 4 times over a period of my life, and I have 3 daughters. They each have a different mom. The only marriage that my second marriage, it was annulled. But each one of my marriages kind of, they all suffered from one main thing. That was my addiction.
Yeah. The common thread the whole way through is the addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can relate to that, man. A lot of, you know, when I look at problems, whether it was with, you know, I'm on my second marriage. I think thankfully we're both in recovery, but you know, yeah, I look back and I can see that common thread also. That was just the one thing that was eating away at all the relationships, eating away at my mind, my soul, you know. Do you remember the time, you know, throughout this process? So fast forward a little bit. Do you remember the time where you thought to yourself, like, I can't stop this. I may need to change something?
Yeah.
Did that ever happen before your full recovery? Or
Well, I first went into recovery mandatory at age 17. It wasn't really recovery. Well, it was a start of recovery. Being forced to go to AA meetings, having to get that certificate signed. I had opened some beers in a grocery store. I'd seen my boss do it at the time. And so they got me for shoplifting, and I was saying it was consuming. Yeah, I thought I could pull it off, but it didn't work out. So that was my first time getting in trouble. And then later on, my drinking just got heavier and heavier. I was about a fifth a day for a long time. I'd have shakes if I didn't drink. My cocaine use was huge with that. Marijuana use was huge with that. And then hallucinogens ever since high school. That had been an ongoing life thing for me.
Right.
Eating LSD, DMT, ecstasy, mushrooms, everything like that.
Right.
It came to the point where after I first went into treatment, I went to Cirque Lodge back in 2003. My family basically said, you need to go into treatment or we're going to just basically, we're done with you. We're done helping you out. And you're getting out of control. You've already lost 1 marriage, 2 marriages at that time. By the time I went there, I was in there with some famous people at the time. They were, you know, I thought that was going to be great. They were saying, oh, it's a resort. You're going to get to go on helicopter rides and do all this fun stuff. So it's like, okay, vacation. Perfect.
Yeah.
So I didn't take it completely serious. But that was when I first actually was able to deal with some things in my life that I'd had that came up in therapy, you know, with the childhood trauma, the abuse, alcoholism. Even though, like I say, even though my family, they drank, they were still always there for me, and they're still always there for me. But getting to that point, to go back to your question on if I felt like I could ever stop or wanted to stop, I thought I could stop at that time. And then I felt like once I had left treatment that I could handle drinking on a weekend, on a birthday, or 1 party a week or something like that. It started off like that, and then it just went full force back into right where I was at, and then harder. You know, the cocaine stopped working. I moved on to meth. Did that daily for over 15 years. And, you know, I could hold on to cocaine and not do it because it was garbage basically to me, even though it was good.
Yeah. Yeah, at that point, once you find something stronger, yeah.
and something that's cheaper, stronger, lasts longer, why not?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're all about more, so that definitely takes a turn there. Did you, before you got into recovery, and I know like you've had several attempts at trying to get recovered, right? And you talked to me about the Serenity tattoo you have, and
yeah.
some of those things you thought would keep you sober. What other like myths or misconceptions did you have about recovery that you believed at first that maybe kept you away from recovery?
Well, even after I left recovery and started using again, I was still for it. It just wasn't for me at that time. I'd still go to my men's groups. I'd still go to a therapist. Um, I would started listening more to people would come to me with their problems, and I was always a good ear and could relate to a lot of the stuff that they were going through. I had a lot of life experiences uh,
Right.
with multiple marriages and divorces, and trying to get custody of your children, and having to deal with all those things that come about with those downfalls. So
And you were still in your active addiction while you were going through all this stuff, right?
yeah, that kept me even more in it because I was like, fuck this shit. I need a drink. This isn't working out for my benefit. I'm going to go to the bar. I'm going to go get some
Right.
coke. Just a way to numb it and not think about things.
Yeah.
It was not the correct way to do it. Now in my life, I can see I have still multiple things that come up every day. If it's grief and loss, or if it's bills, arguing with the wife, trying to get your kids to listen to you. There's other ways of doing it, and it's nice not having to rely on having a substance in me to either not think about it and just deal with it as it comes about.
I think it's funny how we take these substances to kind of like to not feel, right, to tune out, to not feel, and all this time we're doing that in moments of stuff like that, right? Like an argument with your spouse, or trying to get your kids do things, or frustrating just life moments. But in the end, I don't know if you have the same realization I did. We weren't avoiding anything at all. In fact, it was a lot harder going through those challenges not sober.
Yeah,
Being high or drunk was a lot more difficult going through those challenges than it was sober. And just listening to other people's advice that was freely given to me on what to do and how to get through these hard times.
definitely. But then it
Yeah,
was also at that time it was fun. It was also fun doing drugs. Until it was not fun anymore. So
yeah,
either your nose hurt so bad from doing too much coke, or you're blacking out drunk and you're waking up with bloody knuckles from being angry at who knows what else. Someone looked at you
yeah.
wrong, or all of a sudden you're in jail, or your wife wants another divorce. The fuck? Why did I keep getting remarried? But it was due to, I think, feeling that I needed someone in my life all the time. And then also, each of my marriages was because I did love that person at that time, and I still love them. I am currently still married, but it came to the point where she had given up on me and I had given up on her. But we'll touch more on that in a minute. But
Yeah.
with,
Yeah, I'd love to circle back around on that and talk about how relationships can be healed. Because I think
yeah,
one of the misconceptions I had coming into recovery, and for me, I was married to somebody who we used a lot together, right? We became very codependent, and we hadn't had a fight in 13 years of being married and together. And I thought the whole time that was a great thing, but I didn't realize how codependent and how we were really numbing out to each other with these drugs and alcohol. Yeah, so I think it's important thing to come back and talk about how we can repair relationships in recovery. Because one of the things I worried about was that I was never going to repair those things. And I just kept running, right? I just kept running from the things and the people that loved me back into my addiction's arms, basically. So what's been the hardest part of the recovery process for you so far?
this time around, or just overall.
Just in general, yeah.
So this time around, it really hasn't been that difficult for me. Going back into recovery this last stint, I'm going on 3 years now. It's the longest I've ever had since I first started using. So it's an awesome feeling. I wish I would have gotten sober years ago. Done something different. The biggest struggle that's been for me, I don't really have cravings. I'll have using dreams, but that's just you'll wake up in a sweat, being, oh shit, I didn't get to use that line or smoke that bowl
Yeah.
or finish that.
You're either upset. Yeah.
You're either upset, or it's like, but how I look at it, it's just a way of keeping you in check that you're still vulnerable, and that
Right.
you still have that looking over your shoulder that that little devil, or you got the good angel on the other side that's keeping you in check.
Yeah.
But
It's always good to remember our past, not shut the door on it. We can forgive, but forgetting where we come from is typically what leads up to relapses, right?
right.
One of the things I wanted to have you share about too is just in the end, and then we'll talk more about recovery and your story and stuff moving forward. What did things look like in the end for you? Because you have a pretty powerful story of some things that happened before you finally took a turn to, deciding to stay sober over the last 3 years. What did it look like leading up to it? I mean, how messy had life become, and what were the specific instances and circumstances that led you to recovery again?
Yeah. Like I say, meth was probably my biggest downfall. Once I got into meth, I started shooting it up. Just shortly after, it was around. I wanted it around all the time. Then all of a sudden, there's people around that you wouldn't normally have around that just never leave.
Yeah.
That are always
Right.
there.
Yeah.
But yes, meth was a huge downfall in my life. It became a daily thing for over 15 years. It started off small and ended up at about 3.5 grams a day, where I needed it just to function. At the peak of COVID, I think that was the longest stint I'd ever had without having it. It's just because the borders were shut down and prices had gone up so much. I was one that I never wanted to, used to always go out and just have it every day. Have to always go out on the hunt looking for it. And that became more work than anything. And so then I just started getting larger amounts. And so I wouldn't have to go do that all the time. That also brought more people just thinking, oh, this Heron's got lots of drugs. Let's go over there. He'll smoke a bowl with us, or give us a little handout, or I got something I can trade with him for some. So that became a lot of my life for a long time. And then also not wanting a real job. So I would create jobs. I was, like I say, I do freelance art, or I do landscaping, or commercial residential painting, all these different things that was just cash under the table. I avoided my taxes for 20 something years, and now I'm actually paying them and filing them. But it's been the past 5 years that I've actually done that, and I didn't have any consequences from it, thank God. But now I'm actually trying to do some things differently that I didn't do before. But I wasn't ready to stop. I felt at that time as well. My wife wanted me to stop. She was sick of all the riffraff coming around, sick of my severe mood swings.
Yeah.
It created a lot of issues. It created a domestic violence, created a lot of betrayal, a lot of unfaithfulness on my part, due to me not getting what I felt that I should be getting. Having someone that actually wanted you around or wanted to spend some time with you was a big thing for me. And at that point, my wife didn't really want me around. So I went looking for it elsewhere. It wasn't a positive outlook. She was always faithful to me, but I was very unfaithful to her, and I'm still trying to repair that. I had left my wife towards the end, right before all of my major rock bottom hit, when getting arrested I got arrested with a 1/4 pound of meth, an ounce of heroin, and a firearm that came back as a stolen firearm. I had left her for a younger girl that was giving me the attention that I was seeking. It wasn't positive. She was also in addiction, and my wife had, after I'd gotten arrested, they let me out on a failed to file after 7 days, and I was surprised. I think that was just because they wanted to look more into my case and me with having such a large amount of drugs. The firearm, even though with the firearm, it wasn't used to be malicious or out to rob or hurt anyone. I kept it in a gun box under my back seat. Even though it was there. State of Utah, you don't have to re-register a firearm, so I never looked into it. I had purchased it at the gun show, so I thought it was all legit, even though I did get it in the parking lot. That could have been implied, right?
Well, we make pretty compromised decisions and choices when we're not sober.
That was the big part of my downfall, was going into jail. She had told me that you're going to come back, we're going to make this work. And so I went back home after I got out on a failed to file. We still were struggling a lot. She still had a lot of resentments, a lot of anger towards me, and a lot of trust issues with me. And it's an ongoing thing. Trust and rebuilding all that is something that's going to take a long time with anyone in recovery or that's been in that active addiction for so long.
Yeah.
From everyone that they've heard, from family to loved ones to coworkers to friends, and just in general. But so I had gone back home. I went to a treatment center. My lawyer at the time, state lawyer at the time, said, get into treatment. This is going to help you out. I made it 2 weeks at First Step House. It wasn't for me. It wasn't the type of treatment that I wanted.
Yeah, and just for people listening, First Step is really, there's this ongoing joke in the community that I hear where people say first step, last stop. And it's kind of a treatment center that a lot of people are given one of their last opportunities to go to, right? So you might be coming right off the street or coming right out of jail or prison. And thankfully there's programs like that that are becoming more wide known, but it is a very, very hardcore, very strict, behavioral based change program, right?
Yeah, it is. And it's benefited a lot of people. So a lot of people are coming to jail. It was that whole jail mentality once I got in there for those 2 weeks and not being able to, no one was showing up to facilitate groups. There's a lot of things. I wasn't able to get a therapist. So I was like, fuck this, I'm out of here. They said I could do outpatient. Then they called me back an hour later saying, nah, it's not in our best interest. We're not going to let you do outpatient. So it's like, that, I should have reached out for some support there. Started using the same day again, had 2 weeks clean. After that, I was still going to court dates. I had one set up with my current pending case. And I get there, my lawyer, I just given him $8,000 for a retainer. He's like, I can't represent you anymore. You're going to get federally indicted. And so that was really hard for me. I'm coming back from the Zoom hearing at his office, and I called my mom, my dad, told them what was going to happen. I freaked out. First thing I did when I got back to my house is mixed up a couple of really strong drinks, smoked some more meth, and went out and went to go see a couple people, say goodbye. Knowing that the marshals were going to be coming for me. So I get back home. My wife says, you better get rid of all that acid we have. And I had a couple different vials of liquid acid. So that was a big thing of mine, was hallucinogens. I was a daily acid user. I thought microdosing would help me with my meth cravings. And plus I just like that headspace. But so
it sounds like even though you were, maybe not like ready to quit, like you said before. I don't know if I was ever ready. I kind of got almost pushed into it, but it does sound like you were trying to figure out ways to get out of what you're in, right? Like,
I was
one substance for another type of changes, right?
Yeah.
Or changes some people that surrounded you with and all of that. And in the end, though, I think the big thing to point out here as well, that I like to mention, is just that all addictions end up in a bad spot.
Yep.
Right. There's nobody that makes it out alive staying addicted. There's always the three options we hear about a lot, which are jails, institutions, or death. And that's what it looks like for a lot of our brothers and sisters who don't find recovery out there. And so this story of yours that's coming up, I want people to listen closely to it because, again, here's somebody who used for a long time. You might get away with using and being addicted to a substance or anything really for a while. But in the end, the results are always the same. It might be 2 years from now. It might be 10 years from now. It might be 20. It could be 2 months from now. Yeah. I know meth completely destroyed my life before I got into recovery for the first time, Heron. I had used it for about 4 months. And within 4 months, I had lost my home, my business, my wife, my daughter, everything that was inside that home. I was in jail as it was all getting put into a dumpster and bought by somebody else, out of my dream home. And I worked for 15 years to get into a position to be able to live in that type of a place. And it just always ends that way. It doesn't end good. And we'll talk about some solutions on how to get out of it. So go on with the story. So when you were finally found and arrested and it got you into some real recovery, what did you decide to do with all the acid you need to get rid of?
So I went in on a federal hold on a head full of acid. My wife said, get rid of all that acid. I rinsed all the vials I had. They're all just almost empty. So I rinsed them. It was about 50 hits of acid going in there. I was feeling suicidal.
You took the 50 hits of acid, right?
Yeah. She said get rid of it, so I took it. I wasn't.
You just drank it.
Yeah, why waste it? what else? I knew I was going in, so why not go in with a bang? You know, um, it was the worst experience I'd ever had. I've done a lot of frequent flyer. I have a lot of frequent flyer miles under my belt as a psychonaut, and with shooting up DMT to doing DMT journeys, large amounts of acid all the time. But this really hit me with a ton of bricks. I had my samurai sword out, thinking dragons were coming out of the sky. I left my yard, ran out onto North Temple. If no one knows what that is, it's a really rough, that's like the armpit of Salt Lake. So I was out there calling out the homeless out there on the street, trying to start a fight, trying to get hit by our public transit train there. I wound up becoming disoriented, picked up on trespassing charges. I went up someone's back steps and their ring camera got me. They had me at gunpoint until the police got there. I woke up in the drunk tank at the Salt Lake County Jail, and they took me in, and at that point I was put in on a federal hold. So on a federal hold, you never know when you're going to get out. You never know when you're going to have a court date. They just kind of just wake you up and say, you got court right now. So I'm in there with the unknown of what's going to happen next, how long I'm going to be in there. Yeah. So I spent 30 days in the county jail in the medium max side of the jail there with those inmates there. So I'd get out 1 hour a day, be able to go and either make a phone call, shower, sit outside for a minute. And that was really rough. I've never been one that's been in jail, incarcerated. The longest I'd ever been in jail before was 7 days. And that was for domestic and also on my original charges. But I had talked to my family, was trying to get into a program. My mom had reached out to a family friend that was able to help me out with financing it. So I didn't have insurance. So took out a loan. It was prepaid at another treatment center, the one that I was released to, luckily. I didn't know if I was going to be, they weren't going to release me because it wasn't a state funded, like First Step or Odyssey House.
Right.
So I wound up going into Recovery Ways. I was put onto an ankle monitor, full GPS monitoring system. I wasn't able to go out on activities, go to outside meetings. I was stuck on that property. So I took it as a blessing, just to try to get as much as I can out of it. Why not? If I put so much energy into my addiction, why can't I put it into my recovery? So I went out of my way, taking more than enough notes in every group. I was actively engaged, then started facilitating some groups, helping out. I had some great mentors that worked there that were a huge part and still are a huge part in my recovery. I think all those kind of things are very beneficial when someone is in that. But so I finished up my residential stay and did a PHP, partial hospitalization program. I left there because I didn't have any more money to continue on with IOP. So I went to the Haven at that point, did a month of outpatient with them, another state-funded facility. I got kicked out of there for questioning the therapist and standing up for one of my peers. Instead of, at that point, instead of when they said, don't bother coming back, I reached out to my therapist. I reached out to my sponsor. I reached out to my probation officer at the time. And
right. So something certainly changed, because this was almost like the moment you had before, getting kicked out of treatment or whatnot. And it was just like, oh, fuck it, I'm going to go get high and go out again.
Yeah.
Well, this time, this time the things I heard that you said, which were helpful, is you reached out, you talked to a sponsor, you had some mentors in recovery, friends, family, let them know that you might be struggling and that you needed some extra support, which I think is a really hard thing to do for anybody, any human being. Most of us don't like to ask for help, but men certainly don't like to ask for help because we've been taught that we're weak if we do.
Yeah.
And my experience is it's actually quite the opposite. You're very strong if you can ask for help. And so, yeah, I get that. So you go through Haven, you get out of there, and then what turns, because now you live a life of recovery, right? And I want to get into the second part of your story, which is what you're doing now. You actually manage aftercare programs for 4 separate locations of a treatment facility. You still do your stuff with the sound baths and with the frequency work to help people with support through that. You sponsor guys in a 12-step program and help them through the process of getting sober. And so you came from this point of like your entire life being built on drug use and hallucinogenics and meth really for 15 years to where now you've switched that for something else. And so, I mean, have you discovered that these things are like new hobbies and passions for you that have replaced the real addiction you had from your past that was taking you down?
Yes, definitely. So I did wind up, when I did leave the Haven, I wound up getting more money and going back into recovery ways and finishing IOP. So I had done 6 months of treatment, still on ankle monitor for that whole 6 months, but they loosened the reins a little bit where they'd give me a set time, so a curfew. So,
Right.
it was little baby steps. So I was starting to earn some trust back, either with the courts, with my family, starting to look for work. I completed outpatient and started, I really enjoyed the whole recovery field. It was something that I wanted, that I was seeing from others, that I could offer to others and
Right.
to offer. So when I had left treatment, I started looking into working in treatment. So I'm 6 months sober. I walked into Brighton Recovery Center. That's where I still am resided. I wasn't aware that they were even hiring at the time. I walked in and applied, started working at their outpatient facility and doing sober living. Put in as much time as possible. Was able to run some groups. Started to get back into my music, because that was really hard when I first got sober. Because it was always related to my addiction. If it was being creative, I needed to be high to do it. And so
Right.
It was kind of a trigger for me. But so I started doing those things. Things started, I was really putting all my energy into recovery. And during that time, I was still, I was out sharing my story at the VOA, Volunteers of America, going to other treatment centers and sharing my story, starting to become part of a speaker panel group, started volunteering to chair meetings and co-chair meetings, working on my step work. But after spending all this time, they started noticing that this person's really dedicated, and I got moved up fairly quick. So from being an outpatient coordinator, I got moved into a lead life tech position in our residential facility. And then some background screening shit came up for me, so
Right.
they didn't want to lose me. So I get moved into another part of the company. It's doing the billing and the insurance follow-ups, stuff like that. And so then I become at that point, assistant HR. And so I'm getting to do the interviews and hiring for our company here. And, with getting all these people, working with this great team that I work with here at Brighton, I've never had more support from any of them. So I had sentencing on December 17th of this last year. I had 30 coworkers show up to my sentencing, from the CEO, HR, all the clinical directors, medical, even people that I've met in the rooms of AA, and my sponsor, my family. They were all there to help show support. I was looking at getting a 5-year federal prison sentence. So after being on a federal pretrial...
At this point, you've been sober almost 3 years.
Yeah. So this is all within this time. I was on federal pretrial probation for 2.5 years. I always had a great standing with my PO, or different POs. I've had 3 different ones over this time now. I've never missed a UA, never had a dirty, never missed a check-in. Would reach out to them for support if needed. I only had a public defender, but he was an awesome public defender. I couldn't ask for a better one. But then I had heard from him saying, well, you did all the work. It wasn't much I did. It was all the work that you put into this, of staying sober, working the program, trying to better your life and change your life, repair relationships, moving forward and trying to do something productive as a productive part of society. So now I am an independent contractor for Brighton. I'm in charge of alumni and aftercare. I'm their alumni aftercare director. So it's a new role for me. I just started doing that this past month. Like I said, I'm in charge of 4 locations. I'm going to hopefully branch out and help out other recovery centers. If it's doing sound frequency work, that's a lot of I do that. Art, art therapy. I did that in assisted living and memory care for 6 years when my grandmother was in there. So I got a lot out of that as well. But just being able to just continue on being of service and
that's one of the things I was gonna say there real quick, to not to stop you, but I wanted to interject. The underlying thing I'm hearing from this last part of your story about being in recovery as you're going through this, and you're still under, this pretrial service, probation, all that, is there's an underlying thread of service.
Now. That's done.
Yeah, that's done now. Now you're out of that, right?
They gave me another 3 years of probation. So I was looking at 5 years federal prison, and I can now early terminate in 7 months. They gave me a year, so it was a year early termination from December, and now I'm at 7 months left. Still moving on strong with that, and yeah.
And it sounds really what became a big part of your recovery is everything you were pointing out that you've done over the last two and a half, 3 years leading up to that point really had an underlying thread of service in it, right? So do you think for people getting sober that service is something that they should get involved with and the community?
Definitely. I always try to push that on, not like pushing it onto them, but suggest it. I think that's a huge part. Most of the people that come into recovery and treatment, it's either because their families said, I'm done with you, or they have a legal issue, or their health, or they're finally done. So, I try to just help people with learning how to make amends, how to accept what their wrongs are, and just being an active part in recovery. If it's sharing their story, doing some service work, helping set up and tear down a meeting, to just reaching out to just be kind and listen to others. A lot of times people just want someone to listen to what they have had going on with them, because they've never, they don't get that opportunity. Or
a lot of friends and family have turned away, right?
Yeah. Or a way
they've kind of burned all those bridges.
Just to release all those feelings that they've had, that they're either uncomfortable and not comfortable enough to share those with someone. So I love being in that part, to be able to be there to actually help people with that. And so I help with like sober networking, helping get another events planned, get other guest speakers or activities. So I'm enjoying it a lot, just having my life change.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, how do you think your perspective on yourself and your life has changed since you finally found recovery?
My life is, I'm grateful as hell to have been arrested and federally indicted. I'd still be out doing what I was doing if I wouldn't have been, or I'd be in prison,
right?
Or dead. But I am so grateful for that. That was one of my resentments on my 4th step, was the feds, the police, getting in trouble. Sure. But I couldn't be more grateful for that now, because it actually has changed my life. My wife is trusting me again. I've got my kids, seeing that I'm a better father for them. All my daughters have different mothers. They all have a big age range from 26 to 18 to turning 15 right now. My 3 daughters. They can see a difference in me, and they're grateful I can show up for them. Not saying I wasn't there for them before, but I just wasn't there in the way that I should have.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, as a father in recovery too, I understand that completely. I mean, I always considered myself a pretty good dad throughout my addiction, other than the times when I was so out of my mind that I just couldn't be around anybody. You know what I mean? I had to hide and isolate or take off. There's still something different when you're sober and fully present. You get to be an active, present father, and actually there to listen and help and do the things you need to do. If you were able to go back and speak to your past self, if you could go back, let's say 30 years, right, with all the knowledge you have now, what do you think you would tell your younger self?
I would have shaken myself a little bit and said, hey, snap out of this. You've got all you're going to get out of this. You're not going to get anything more. I don't regret experiencing all those things in my life. Our lives come to us as, I do have some regrets, but looking, it was what life experience was at the time,
Right.
in my life. So if I wouldn't have done it, maybe I would have wound up doing it later in life, and things would have been even worse,
Yeah.
or having the multiple divorces and losing houses and not being able to have my kids around me all the time. That's my biggest
Yeah.
loss.
Yeah.
More so just not being able to spend that quality time with my family and have been there. As I could have, so many other opportunities could have opened if I wouldn't have spent all that time and money on drugs and alcohol
Yeah.
and legal fees and treatment.
All of it. Yeah. I mean, it's true. We trade one thing for the other. It's like, and that's one thing too. I want people to hear that might be listening to this for the first time. If you're out there struggling to get sober, you're thinking about it. I guess they call that sober curious now. Whatever it is. I mean, you might be wondering, like, is it worth what I'm trading? And I can tell you, absolutely, it's not. I'm sure Heron would say the same thing as well as any of my other guests, that the things we trade for our addiction, a lot of them we can never come back and get back. One of those is time. And that might be time with family members or kids or loved ones and opportunities. We just have to start where we are today and do the next right thing each day and continue to improve and progress and be able to create new memories, which is a blessing because most of us shouldn't be here, but it is hard. What do you think most people misunderstand about addiction and recovery? I know you've worked around a lot of people in recovery. You've worked around a lot of people that are getting newly sober in these treatment centers. So what's a common misunderstanding you think that people have about addiction?
Well, there is the background history of it when people have had it in their family. Definitely, I think that is passed on for sure. But I think a lot of it is people just aren't ready, or they're being forced, or they go back to old mindsets. They're not taking these new tools that they should be learning while in recovery, of ways to deal with things, conflict, how to deal with past trauma, learning all these new skills. I think if anything, people should really just take it, they should offer this kind of shit in high school, if they,
No.
a lot of the classes that they do in recovery, if we would have learned that stuff in high school, I think so many people would have turned out a lot different, or at least had a different mindset on stuff.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. You probably grew up with the same day and age of the Just Say No campaign, right?
right?
That I did. And so, growing up, that's what we knew about drugs was two eggs in a frying pan and Miss Reagan telling us to say no. Unfortunately, addiction is a little more powerful than just being able to say no. Once the one of us who has substance use disorder inside of them or has developed it over time, once we pick up that drug or drink, we do lose all of our choices. Now that you and I are sober, we do have a choice, just like you said, to use the tools that we learned.
I know if I was to go back out and start using again, if I thought I could have a drink here and there, that wouldn't last long. It would be,
you'd be right back where you were.
Be right back where I was. I'd be out of running and gunning or hiding and lying. That's not
back out with the samurai sword.
Yeah, right. Why do I want everything that's positive that's happened in my life and the amount of money and time that I've put into it, my recovery? I do not want to let all of my loved ones down. I don't want to let myself down. I don't want to ruin my career that I've just a newfound career, in recovery. I think it's awesome. I can still be creative, but I enjoy trying to be out there to help people more. I can still use that outlook, but I'd be right back to where I was if I was to start using again, and that's scary. It's really scary.
Yeah, it is scary. What advice would you have for somebody? Let's say somebody's listening who's struggling with addiction and they're really just afraid to seek help, or maybe it's a man, another man like us who maybe you're told that men don't cry, men don't show emotions, and men don't, give up and back off and ask for help. I mean, what kind of advice would you have for someone like that?
I would suggest to them just reaching out, getting into some men's support groups. If they're not willing to get into treatment, try to get into a men's support group. That's huge because you get to talk about men's issues,
right?
And you're in a safe place. And it is okay to cry. Most people that come into recovery, all these emotions and feelings just start coming up within that first 30 to 90 days, and they're uncontrollable. They'll just start coming out, and you're like, I don't know what to do.
Because we always masked it with the substance, right?
Yeah, it's a good thing. I think it's you always feel better afterwards. I always tell people it's okay to cry, not to look down at themselves for it. It's not a sign of weakness. It's refreshing. It releases dopamine. It helps you be able to at least come to terms with things. I think if you can't get into a treatment center and you're needing help, try to look into either into an AA group, CA group, CMA group, HA, NA, one of the A's. So
Right.
that try to introduce yourself, be vulnerable, try to let down your guard a little bit and ask for the help. Get a phone number every time you go to a meeting. Start building a sober connection, a network of people you can reach out to, and listening to people's stories. Find the things that you can relate to, and that or something that you want in that you see in their recovery that they have. It might not be the brand new car, the brand new house, the new wife, the trophy girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever, it's, but if you see the things that, look for more of the things on like how they're happy or how their life has changed dramatically. They're no longer dealing with legal issues. They're able to be of service to others. Those are some of the things that I would suggest for people to look out and try.
Yeah, and I agree. I think those are all huge. I also like what you said about, you've stored up so much more rebuilt relationships, rebuilt trust, with your wife, with family members, friends, coworkers, in your career. It would be really silly to go back, right?
It'd be
What?
it'd be like in pure insanity. It'd be like,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, well, we've known to be insane sometimes,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Another thing I always talk about, not a lot, but sometimes on the show, especially with the road we've been going down with this, is just like society's overall view on addiction. What changes do you think? Because you're actively out in the community, you've kind of got your boots on the ground with newcomers and people that are just getting sober, people that are trying to rebuild an entire life and build a new network of people and drop all the old unhealthy ones. What type of changes do you think society or communities could make to help support those in recovery a little bit better?
Say again. So things inside my community that I can.
Yeah, some things that society could change to maybe help support people in recovery and getting out of their addiction.
So I don't know, just like I say, just trying to find an outlook or just having sober connections. Being able to ask for help when needed. Trying to, if you can't make it to a meeting on your own, see if someone else will help get you there. Having a sober support. Trying to get a sponsor. Actually opening up and doing the steps. Learning how to make amends, how to know that you are powerless and cannot handle drugs or alcohol. Facing all those old fears and moral inventory of all the things that you've done wrong in your life, and learning how to help and restore that to others. I don't know. I think
it's really the way out, right?
Yeah.
Is the way out. And if somebody was watching the podcast who has a friend or family member who is, struggling with addiction, what would you advise them to do? So if you had a son or a daughter struggling with addiction, or a brother or a sister or a friend, and you're seeing them go down this path, what do you think the best thing friends and family can do for those of us that are lost in our addiction?
I think let them know that we can see that they're struggling and all these issues are coming up, and try to show support that way. Don't be angry with them. Sometimes you do have to have that tough love and set down some firm boundaries. Definitely, I believe in that, especially if they're being walked all over. But listen to them. Let them know that you're seeing all these dramatic changes in their life, that they need an outlook. I don't think threats of divorce or we're going to get rid of you. Threats don't help. I think anyone that has a loved one that's in it, if they could look into maybe going to an Al-Anon meeting or something like that beforehand, so they can kind of see what roles are played in for the loved ones towards someone in addiction. I think that would help. There's also hotlines you can call. I'm sure a lot of the treatment centers are out there, just their main admissions lines. You can call and talk to them. The admissions intake staff I know with our facility and others, they have a lot of resources that they're willing to give out, and also suggestions. So
I think a key thing you mentioned there is just really showing them that they have some support at home, because there really is no threat or consequence that's going to make us get sober. It can force us towards the path of recovery, but at the end of the day, there is some type of a personal choice in there that you also made of like, hey, I'm going to give this my all this time and see what happens. And it's turned out great for you. So in closing, as we wrap up here, Heron, again, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and talking about what works and what doesn't work. And, the way that you experience things in your addiction and now in recovery. What is the one thing that you'd want people listening to this show this week to walk away with? If you could leave them with one thought, what would it be?
That it does work if you put in the time and energy. You will see some big changes in your life. It's not going to be easy. It's not instant. It's not a 30-day fix, thinking you can go into residential and fix in 30 days.
Right.
It's going to definitely be hard. And if this is something you want, you got to put in that work for it. If it's the amount of time that you spend out looking and using, put it towards something different. Put it towards your recovery. You'll definitely see some benefits out of it. Life changes with family, your health, with future, just with your overall future. Like I say, just stick with it. Don't give up, and reach out for help. If you can't do it alone, that's why these groups are out here. Support groups, AA, NA. There's others that have been through it as well. Get that social connection and be vulnerable. Why not try something different in your life?
I agree, right? And it's like, the one thing too we can always think about is like the same BS is always going to be there. I was talking to a newcomer the other day and just said, look, why don't you just try this out for a year and see what happens, right? Give your all for a year.
Yeah.
Treat it the exact same way as you did your addiction. Put that much time and energy into this. And if in a year from now your life's not noticeably better and you don't feel better about yourself and the outcome of your future, then you can go ahead and go back out. That stuff's always going to be there. It's only getting worse, never better. So once again, Heron, I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much for being vulnerable and telling your story and sharing with us a lot of things that most people would try to keep hidden away. I think that's really what helps free people from addiction. And if you're listening to the show today and you have somebody who's struggling with addiction or yourself, or if you're a family member who needs extra support, you can always go to our main channel on YouTube, which is the Let's Do More podcast, and reach out with a message there. Those messages are monitored by either myself or a couple of members of the team, and we'll always get back to you and always help out. I do appreciate those of you that have done that so far and been vulnerable enough to reach out to a stranger and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. You don't have to do it alone. And again, Heron, thanks so much for coming on, man. I appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Anytime. Thank you. Thank you for all your help. I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
You as well. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Let's Do More. I hope you found inspiration, hope, and some powerful takeaways to help you on your own journey of growth and resilience. Remember, no matter what you're facing, you have the strength to overcome it and the power to create positive change in your life and clarity. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, download, and review the podcast. It really helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. And don't forget to follow us on social media and stay connected and be part of the Let's Do More community. You can find us on Facebook at Let's Do More Podcast, Instagram and TikTok at Let's Do More.life, X at Let's Do More Life, and our primary channel is on YouTube at Let's Do More. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts, share your stories, or let us know what topics you would like to hear about next. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, remember, let's keep pushing forward, inspiring each other, and doing more for ourselves and the world around us. Take care, and I'll see you on the next show.